This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome to the second episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Today, I want to talk about pain and pleasure. No, this is not 50 Shades of Grey. Sorry to disappoint, but the explicit rating on the podcast is because there's 100% chance I'm going to F-bomb at some point, and it's just better to give everyone that heads up. No, I want to talk about pain and pleasure in the context of human motivation, because it will give you insight and help you understand more about how to not only motivate yourself in any situation, and I mean from anything to clearing your to-do list to having the courage and the bravery to take a look at something in your life that maybe has had so much pain associated with it that you've literally been ignoring it. I'm going to use an example from one of my clients that illustrates this really well. So one of the things that we were working on was the idea of bringing more peace and calm into her life because it was very chaotic. And in this particular case, we were focusing on the to-do list, or what we call the energy drainer list. And one of them was, she said, my kitchen cabinets are just a mess. They're a mess. Every time I open them up, they stress me out. And so we were working on, okay, well, why don't we get those organized? And what needed to happen to get there? And I asked her, I said, well, how long do you think it would take to do this, to just knock it out? And she said, honestly, probably about 15 minutes. And I said, okay, well, it's pretty easy to carve out 15 minutes. Why haven't you been doing it? And she thought about it for a minute and she said, well, every time I open up those cabinets, I get so stressed. I see the chaos. I see the disorder. I can't find what I'm looking for. In the morning when I'm trying to get the kids ready, when I'm trying to make dinner, I can't find anything. I'm so stressed out every time I open those cabinets. But then I shut the doors again and it goes away for a little bit. And I forget about it until it comes time to open the cabinet doors again. And I asked her what would happen if she left those cabinet doors open all the time. If one morning she just opened all of them and left them open. And I could hear the anxiety and the stress in her voice. And she said, oh my God, I would have to drop whatever I was doing and organize those cabinets. I wouldn't be able to take it. It's just so cluttered. It's so disorganized. I wouldn't be able to take it. And this may sound on the surface like a silly example about cabinets, but it's really not. And it's really pretty profound because this is exactly why we stay stuck in certain patterns, that we are turning down the pain on something just enough that we don't actually have to deal with it. Because the fundamental principle of human motivation is about either seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. And it doesn't have to be physical pain. It doesn't have to be physical pleasure. It's a perceived pleasure or pain, whether it's psychological, and the pain can be associated with time you're giving up to do it. It can be associated with a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to fall into the, biology book definition of pain. I'm talking about anything that's unpleasant, that's associated with doing something. And so in this example, this cabinet organization was on her to-do list, but we hadn't associated either enough pleasure or enough pain for her to actually do it. And the times that it felt painful, and this pain being the stress, the disorganization, the chaos that came from trying to find anything in the cabinets in the morning while she's already stressed and getting ready, that pain wasn't high enough because when she closed those cabinet doors, it turned it down just enough that she didn't have the motivation to do anything about it. And so when I suggested leaving those doors open, not closing them, not turning down the quote unquote pain on it, that's when she said, oh my God, I would have to drop what I was doing and do it right then and there. So anytime you have an area where you're feeling stuck, I'd invite you to start to think about this concept of what motivates us and what perceived pain you're associating with doing something or with not doing something. And now I'm going to take this a step further and apply this to the ways that we avoid dealing with painful things in our life. And I'm going to tie back to something I said in the first episode about my journey and a time in my life when I was dealing with a lot of pain without really fully understanding that I was in so much pain. And it was after my second divorce. I was in the heat of a very toxic, unpleasant relationship. And I was living with a lot of anxiety, insane amounts of anxiety. And because I wasn't yet at a place where I could really look at the relationship I was in or the state that I was in personally and make any changes, that wasn't available to me at that point. I was still very locked in just a lot of unhealthy patterns of my own. So because I wasn't in a place to be able to look at that, I just had all that anxiety. And I was on anti-anxiety medication, but I was also drinking a lot more than I ever had, which was ironic, coming off of my second marriage and having seen alcohol in a new way, having watched what it had done to my marriage. And I want to be really clear here. I don't think alcohol is evil. I think if it disappeared from the planet tomorrow, we as humans would find some other thing to use and abuse that wasn't meant to be used that way. So I don't think alcohol is evil. I am now to the point where I can really enjoy a good glass of wine and it really feels good because I'm not using it anymore to numb. And that's what happened to me is I had the pain of my divorce. I had the pain I was dealing with and living in every day from the relationship that I was in, that I was staying in because I didn't understand how to leave. I didn't know my own value, all those things. I was living in this place and it was so painful. And I was drinking a lot more and I didn't notice it at the time. It kind of crept up and I would have a glass of wine at night and then that would be 2 glasses of wine and then it would be 3 glasses of wine. And sometimes when I was by myself, I would have a bottle and then I would cry myself to sleep and really cry, sob myself to sleep. And it was, alcohol, it's been an interesting study for me, certainly one I never thought to undertake, but of how we think about drinking in our culture and what we consider to be normal. And the first time this really came to my attention was after I discovered my husband's challenges with drinking. Is I went into full overfunctioning, trying to find things that we could do that didn't involve alcohol, places we could go that didn't involve alcohol. And what I discovered is that even if you're going to a picnic, somebody's talking about drinking. And again, it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just very pervasive in our culture. And it's acceptable. And I made a ton of jokes about, wine and drinking wine and wine time and mimosa time and whatever, all the t-shirts, and I owned half of them and I get it. And I love to laugh. There's nothing wrong with that. But I was definitely guilty of drinking to numb my pain and to numb my anxiety. And, drinking a whole bottle of wine a night by yourself and crying yourself to sleep, in case anybody thought that was normal, yeah, might want to take a look at some things. And the point where I reached with it is I really embarrassed myself one night at an event because I was dealing with some stuff with my boyfriend at the time and had a couple glasses on an empty stomach. And people that know me know I don't have very much of a filter as it is, and get a couple glasses of wine in me and I really don't have a filter. And, I said and did some things that night that I'm not proud of because it was coming from such a place of deep pain and deep wounding. And I got a couple glasses of wine in me and, one of his friends asked me a question and I told her. And then, I did some stuff later on in the night that, it was just embarrassing. And that's just not who I am. And it's not who I wanted to be and who I wanted to show up as in the world. And that was several months before I finally made the decision that I needed to stop drinking for a while. And, it was around the time that I alluded to in the first podcast where I kind of had my dark night of the soul. And one of the things I had to do was choose to stop drinking for a while because I had to it was turning down the pain that I was feeling. and this ties back to this idea of pain and pleasure, that I was numbing it. I was numbing the pain, I was numbing the anxiety rather than sitting with it. And first of all, asking, do you want to be in a relationship where you feel this much anxiety? Or asking myself what it was that was, leading me to drink so much or keeping me in this place that I really didn't need to be in. And so it was stopping the numbing that was happening. And so I didn't drink for 2 years, a little over 2 years. I stopped drinking entirely. And when I stopped drinking, I also stepped down off my anti-anxiety medication. And I needed to get to a point where I didn't have a filter on life and I could really just look at things and feel the pain. And if you're on medication, check with your doctor first. I got to put this disclaimer in there. But it was something I needed to do because I needed to really look at, where is all this anxiety coming from? What's at the root of it? How do you move through it? And I couldn't move through it as long as I was turning down the dial on the pain. It was just going to get worse. And so my pain literally got to such a level that it blew the metaphorical doors off of my cabinets, and I had to deal with it. And so I stopped drinking for a while. And when I did that, it was really interesting what I observed. And, I really didn't miss it. And that, we lived in California, and I love, a good vineyard. I love a good glass of wine, but I really didn't miss it all that much. And it was interesting when I was in social situations, I would just have sparkling water. And the number of questions I got about it was really fascinating. And people were interested of, why aren't you drinking? And I said, it wasn't serving my life anymore. And that's what I would say, because that was true. Nobody needs to know the gory details of your story. That's way too much at a bar anyway, right? And that's not really what they're asking. But I just said it wasn't serving my life anymore, and I needed to stop. And, it was interesting, the responses I would get. Sometimes people would say, whoa, I don't know if I could do that. And then I would watch this register on their face, and they would say, wait, why don't I think I could do that? Oh my God, maybe I need to do that for a while, right? And, when I talk to people about it, they've said, oh gosh, I don't know if I could do that. I go to so many social events, and there's this fear of like feeling awkward or feeling out of place. But this is something that I want to say to anybody that's thinking about doing this. And I'm seeing this become more of a trend. And I think there's a book out there that talks about this, of like this kind of sober, curious lifestyle. That might be the name of the book. I apologize to the author for forgetting. But for anybody who's considering it, think about why you're worried about what anybody else thinks about it. And this also ties back to that self-worth piece of, if you're doing something that's right for you, that's healthy for you, who cares what anybody else thinks? And I realize for a lot of us, it's not as easy as just who cares. But when I stopped drinking, it was because it was so deeply right and good for me and healthy for me that I didn't care what anybody else thought. And that's the place that you need to operate from in general, right? And it's not, it's not a I don't give a fuck attitude in a bad way. It's I don't give a fuck because I'm giving a fuck about the right things. I'm giving a fuck about myself. See, I told you I was going to F-bomb. I care about me, and I care about what's right for me. And we can even tie this pain and pleasure motivation to why you would care about what somebody else thought about you quitting drinking for a while, right? And I think that the message that I want to share around this is, there is, and some of this ties back to evolutionary psychology, and I won't get into it now, but this idea that, drinking, as an example, drinking is a very socially acceptable thing. And there's this evolutionary imperative to fit in, not to be outcast from the tribe, from the herd, right? Because back in the days when we were running around in tribes on the Serengeti, exile from the tribe, abandonment meant death. And there's a part of our brain that still operates that way. There's this million-year-old programming that's going with this modern world we're in, that somehow there's going to be pain and abandonment if we don't go along with what the masses are doing. But we also have to bring in that executive portion of our brain that says, hold on a minute, this is actually better for me to do this. And look at it this way. All it takes is somebody being brave enough to say, you know what, guys, I just realized that, I love going out with you guys. I love spending time with you. But for me, I just need to stop drinking for a while. So I'm just going to have sparkling water when we go out. Or, I'm going to have a soda and lime when we go out. And it helps give other people permission to explore those things as well. And it's a way that we can start to shift the societal script that exists around this. And again, I want to reinforce the fact that this doesn't have anything to do with alcohol being evil at all. I think that once you've done the work on this, and when I say do the work, I mean you've sat with your why behind it. It's, why am I having this glass of wine? Or why am I having 3 glasses of wine? Or why am I going out every night? When you've really sat with it, when you've asked yourself the questions, when you've maybe stopped doing it for a while to see what might be underneath it, and then there's absolutely nothing wrong with going out and enjoying a fun night, enjoying a drink with friends when it's coming from the right place, right? And that's really the core of what I want to share around this. And it's not just alcohol, like I said, it's patterns that we have with overeating, overdrinking, overspending. If we're using it as a way to numb something or a way to avoid a pain or an ache or try to fill up something in ourselves, and if we're doing it in a way that's ultimately not going to be healthy, right? Like overspending or, overeating and overdrinking, if it's a way that's ultimately going to be detrimental to us, those are the things that we want to stop and take a look at. And in order to do that, we have to either turn up the pain around what would happen if we continued down the road as we are, right? Flash forward 5 years, if I'm still doing the same things I am today, what's the impact going to be on that? And then turning up the pleasure around, what if I take the time right now to take a look at these things, and what's the possible pleasure that's on the other side of it? Wow, I could live a healthier life overall. I could feel better about my day. I could feel better about my body. I could feel better overall. And obviously there's a lot more to all of this, right? So many layers, and everybody has their own unique situations. But I wanted to share this because it's a really important topic. It's a really important concept. And I saw firsthand in my life the ways that I was using something that was socially acceptable to hide, and I actually used to say that alcoholism was the disease that hid in plain sight because, when I was married, everybody just thought, my husband was just the good time guy. I would go out and have a great time at the bar. Nobody had to deal with what was left over at the end of the night. And it was just, no, it's totally fine. Everybody goes out, everybody drinks, everybody has a good time. Let's make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. Let's make sure that we're really enjoying it for how it was meant to be enjoyed, because the way that I can now experience just a glass of wine is like the way it's meant to be experienced, like the way that we would have like a decadent dessert. You don't do it every night, right? You just do it on either a special occasion or just to really enjoy it, to enjoy the aroma, enjoy the flavors, all of that. Like that's the way that it should be used. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me. And so I would love to hear from you guys on how this resonated with you, on where you've seen this show up in your life, on how you feel understanding this motivation principle of pain and pleasure is going to benefit you. And again, this works on big to small. This works on clearing off your to-do list to finding what's blocking you from taking a deeper look at things in your life. Thank you for being here with me today, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.